Dylan Hart didn't expect his morning to start with a bag of oranges exploding at his feet and a stranger's purse tumbling into the gutter. He caught the rolling fruit with one hand and bent down to retrieve the purse before it hit the puddle. "Whoa, you okay?" he asked, holding it out to the woman who'd nearly collided with him at the edge of the farmer's market. She had 3 full grocery bags hanging from each arm and a frazzled look in her eyes, like she'd just stormed out of a boardroom and into chaos. Yes, sorry. "I didn't mean to ugh, this is a disaster," she muttered, her voice sharp but breathless. Dylan reached for her grocery bags without thinking. "Here, let me help you," her eyes narrowed. "You don't have to, I've got it," he said, balancing 2 of the bags easily in his arms. "You're about to pull a shoulder muscle." She hesitated, then sighed. "Thanks, I wasn't expecting this place to be so crowded." He glanced down at the sleek heels she wore, totally impractical for the broken sidewalk and muddy grass. "Not exactly dressed for weekend produce hunting, huh?" She gave a small, unexpected laugh. "Clearly not." Dylan adjusted the bags and nodded toward the parking lot. "Where's your car?" She looked sheepish. "A few blocks away." "I couldn't get a spot nearby." "Come on, I'll walk you there," he said easily. "I'm Dylan, by the way." She shifted the remaining bag in her hand and glanced up at him. Her eyes were a cool steel blue, sharp and intelligent. "Kara." "Kara Fields." They started walking down the street, the early spring breeze tugging Kara's coat as she tried to keep up. "So, are you always this helpful to strangers?" she asked, a little amused. "Only the ones dropping citrus bombs in the street," he said with a grin. "And I've got a soft spot for people struggling with grocery bags." Been there?" she asked. He hesitated. "Yeah, I've got a kid, my son Oliver, he's 6. Grocery runs on a budget are kind of a sport for me." Her eyebrows lifted. "Oh, that's impressive," he laughed. "Impressive's generous. It's mostly just chaos and coupons." Kara smiled, something soft flickering behind her polished exterior. "Well, thank you, Dylan." They stopped at a sleek black car that clearly didn't belong in this neighborhood. Dylan raised an eyebrow. "Nice ride." Kara quickly unlocked it and began loading the bags. "Rental," she said with a shrug. Dylan stepped back once everything was packed. "All right, you're all set." "Wait," Kara said, reaching into her purse. "Can I at least buy you a coffee or something?" He hesitated, glancing at his watch. "I've got to grab Ollie from his friend's house in a bit," but her expression flickered with something disappointment, but she quickly masked it. "Of course, thanks again." He looked at her for a beat longer. There was something about her like she didn't quite belong here, but also didn't want to say why. Still, she'd been kind. Real. And it had been a while since someone had looked at him like he was more than just the tired guy with a backpack and a to-do list. "I come here almost every Saturday," he said suddenly. "If you're around next week, maybe I'll let you buy me that coffee then." Kara smiled. "Maybe I will." She got in the car and drove off, and Dylan stood there a second longer than he should have, wondering why a stranger with perfect nails and a rental car had made his morning feel lighter. Kara didn't plan to return the next Saturday. She had 3 meetings scheduled, a flight to Chicago on Sunday, and a quarterly investor call that made her want to throw her phone into the nearest lake. But all week, her mind kept drifting back to the man with warm eyes, calloused hands, and a crooked smile that didn't seem to ask for anything. And she hated how much she liked it. By Saturday morning, she was back at the market, walking slower than necessary, scanning the crowd until "there she is," Dylan said, appearing beside her with a worn canvas bag and a mischievous glint in his eye. "I figured I'd see you again." "You were that sure?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. He shrugged. "Let's just say I had a good feeling." They ended up walking the stalls together, arguing over the ripeness of strawberries and whether or not asparagus was worth the price. Kara found herself laughing more than she had in weeks. He bought her coffee from a street cart and insisted on paying. She offered to cover it, but he shook his head. "You helped me today, actually." "How?" "My week sucked," he said simply. "Work's been slow. Oliver got sick and I haven't slept through the night in 4 days. But this is the first hour I've felt like myself in a while." Kara looked down at her cup, swallowing the knot in her throat. "I know what that's like." They kept meeting every Saturday after that. Sometimes Kara brought homemade banana bread. Other times, Dylan brought Oliver, who quickly decided Kara was the coolest adult ever after she bought him a caramel apple and knew the names of all the planets. "You're like a space genius," Oliver said one morning, hanging off her arm. Kara laughed. "Well, I did go to school for engineering once." Dylan raised an eyebrow. "You're full of surprises." She met his gaze and smiled. "You have no idea." And he didn't know she ran one of the largest tech companies on the East Coast. He didn't know her face was on finance magazine covers, or that she'd flown to Geneva for a summit 3 days ago and taken a red eye back just to make it to the market this morning. He didn't know she owned the building where the organic honey vendor they liked paid rent. She didn't tell him. Not yet, because for the first time in years, someone was falling for Kara, not Kara Fields, CEO of Volt Edge Technologies, just Kara, and she was falling too hard. "Have you ever tried cooking with saffron?" Kara asked, eyeing the small glass jar on the spice vendor's stall. She reached for one, then paused when she saw the price tag. Dylan leaned in. "Not unless I win the lottery tonight. That tiny thing costs more than my electric bill." Kara laughed softly, setting it down. "Fair enough. It's probably overkill for spaghetti night anyway." He grinned. "Spaghetti night is sacred. You don't mess with tradition." They continued walking through the rows of stalls, the late morning sun warming the pavement. Dylan kept one eye on Oliver, who was crouched by the flower booth, utterly fascinated by a bee hovering near the daisies. "Do you mind if I ask something personal?" Kara said, glancing at him as they continued. He looked over, thoughtful. "Sure, shoot." "What happened to Oliver's mom?" He didn't answer right away. His jaw flexed slightly as he handed a few bills to a vendor for a box of fresh plums. Then he nodded toward a bench near the playground and said, "Let's sit." Once they were settled, he rubbed his palms together like he was working up the words. "She left when Oliver was almost 2, said she wasn't built for small-town life or diapers, or, well, anything that didn't involve weekend getaways and bottomless brunches." Kara stayed quiet, letting the breeze carry the silence between them. "She moved to LA," he continued. "New boyfriend, new job, new everything. Signed over custody without a fight. Haven't heard from her in 3 years." Kara's brows lifted slightly. "She's never even visited." He shook his head. "Nope, Oliver doesn't remember her, and I try not to fill in the blanks. He's got enough to figure out without wondering why someone didn't stick around." Kara turned her gaze to the playground, where Oliver was now attempting to juggle 2 apples and a daisy. She could see how much Dylan carried, how heavy the quiet strength in him was. It wasn't just about being a dad. It was about being both parents every single day without complaint. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He gave her a half smile. "Don't be, we're okay. Some days are rougher than others, but he's a good kid. And I wouldn't trade these last few years for anything." She watched him for a moment, then asked, "So, what do you do when you're not tackling produced prices and superhero school drop-offs?" "I work construction. Mostly residential remodels, smaller jobs. I pick up what I can when it comes in." "Is that what you always wanted to do?" His eyes drifted toward the sky. "Not exactly. I used to draw houses when I was a kid. Blueprints, floor plans. I wanted to be an architect. But college wasn't in the cards, and well, life happened." Kara leaned back, tucking her hands into her coat pockets. "You ever think about going back, finishing what you started?" Dylan laughed under his breath. "With what time or money? I'm already working weekends and nights sometimes. Besides, I'm 34. That ship sailed." "It hasn't. Not if you still think about it." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Why do I get the feeling you're not just talking about architecture?" She smiled, but didn't answer. Later that afternoon, Dylan dropped off Oliver at his sister's house for a sleepover. When he returned home alone, the quiet hit differently. He stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking at the drawing Oliver had left on the fridge, a stick figure version of the 3 of them at the market. He didn't know what was happening between him and Kara. He didn't even know if he should call it anything yet. But it had been a long time since someone asked about his dreams like they mattered. The next morning, Kara paced in the boardroom of a skyscraper downtown. Her assistant, Nadia, stood by the door holding a tablet and a triple-shot espresso. "You've rescheduled this meeting twice," Nadia said carefully. "The investors are getting twitchy. They'll be fine. I just need 10 more minutes." "You're never 10 minutes late," Nadia pointed out. Kara nodded absently, her mind somewhere else entirely. I know. She was supposed to be reviewing expansion plans for their European division, but her thoughts kept circling back to Dylan's quiet confession, to the way he'd looked at his son like he was the whole world. To the way he'd said, "We're okay," even when it was obvious he was doing it all on his own. And she hated that she couldn't just tell him the truth. But what would she say? That she'd spent the last 5 years building a company from the ground up, only to hide it from the one person who finally saw her as more than her title. She wasn't ready for that. Not yet. That evening, she returned to her penthouse, a sleek, glass-walled space overlooking the city skyline. She kicked off her heels and pulled her hair out of its twist, walking barefoot across the cold marble floor. The silence stretched, too big and too hollow. Her phone buzzed. "Dylan. Hey. Oliver wants to know if you'll be at the market next weekend, something about a rematch in apple juggling." She stared at the message, heart catching in her chest. She hadn't planned to go back again. She'd told herself she was too busy, that it was a distraction, that it could never work. But then she heard Oliver's laugh in her head, and saw the way Dylan looked at her that morning like she was something good in his life without even trying. She typed back one word: absolutely. The first time Dylan saw Kara in something other than her usual weekend coat, she was standing at the edge of the school gymnasium in a navy blazer, holding a clipboard and talking to one of the PTA coordinators. He blinked twice. Oliver tugged at his hand. "She's helping with the auction." "I saw her when Aunt Ratch dropped me off." Dylan's confusion deepened. "Auction, school fundraiser, grown-ups bid on stuff. There's a trip to Florida and a dinner cruise, and Miss Kara gave a painting," Oliver explained, bouncing on his heels. "She said I wasn't supposed to tell you." Kara glanced over just then and froze for half a second before lifting her hand in a small wave. Dylan waved back, his brows lifting as she made her way across the gym floor. "I didn't know you were part of the PTA," he said as she reached them. "I'm not," she replied, tucking the clipboard under her arm. "But they needed volunteers, and I had the afternoon free." He looked around at the decorated tables and the portable stage being set up. "This doesn't look like something people throw together last minute." Kara didn't deny it. "I like being involved, especially when it helps schools like this one." Dylan hesitated, then said, "You didn't have to do that painting." She tilted her head. "Why not?" "Because that's the kind of thing people spend time on. Time you probably don't have," Kara shrugged. "I made time." He studied her, sensing there was more behind her answer, but a group of teachers walked by and called Kara's name. She excused herself, promising to catch up later. By the time the silent auction began, the gym had transformed. String lights glowed above round tables, and local parents mingled while servers passed trays of hors d'oeuvres. Dylan had never been to anything like it. He felt out of place in his button-down shirt, but Oliver had insisted he wear it. Kara was across the room, deep in conversation with the school principal. She caught Dylan's eye and smiled a different kind of smile, one that felt quietly charged. "Your painting's up to 600, he told her when she returned to his side. She raised an eyebrow. "Really? Apparently there's a bidding war between two dentists." Kara laughed, genuinely surprised. "I didn't think it would go that high." "Maybe they're not bidding on the painting," he said. "Maybe it's the artist." She turned to him. "Is that what you'd bid on?" "I'm here, aren't I?" Before she could answer, the auctioneer announced the final round. Dylan's eyes drifted to an item he hadn't noticed before: dinner for two at Le Rive, the city's most exclusive rooftop restaurant. His stomach twisted. He'd once looked up the menu for fun. The appetizers alone cost more than his grocery budget for the week. "Thinking of bidding?" Kara asked. He shook his head quickly. "Places like that aren't built for people like me." She looked at him for a moment, then said, "What if they were?" "They're not." "Maybe they should be," she said softly. He didn't answer, but the words stayed with him long after the event ended. The following Saturday, Kara didn't show up at the market. Dylan tried not to notice. He bought apples with Oliver, listened to a local band playing near the bakery stall, and told himself she probably had a meeting. But something about the quiet absence of her laugh, her questions, her presence, it nagged at him. He didn't hear from her the next week either. By the third Saturday, he told himself it had been a fleeting thing, that maybe she'd changed her mind, that maybe she'd realized he wasn't enough. But that didn't stop him from staring at his phone longer than necessary each night. Then, the invitation arrived. It came in a black envelope, slipped under his apartment door with no return name. Inside was a single card, "Meet me tonight, 8 o'clock. Dress code, whatever makes you feel alive." There was no address, but attached was a key card and a handwritten note on the back, "Top floor. Take the private elevator." Dylan stared at it, heart pounding. That night, he left Oliver with his sister and stood in front of a downtown high-rise with mirrored glass and a doorman who seemed to know exactly who he was. "Penthouse," the man said, gesturing toward the elevator as he handed Dylan back his ID. "She's expecting you." The elevator opened directly into a 2-story space he could barely process. Glass walls framed the skyline, and soft jazz played from hidden speakers. The air smelled like citrus and something expensive he couldn't name. Kara stood at the far end of the room, barefoot in black trousers and a silk blouse, holding 2 glasses of wine. Dylan stepped in slowly. "You live here?" She didn't answer right away. "This is one of my places," he blinked. "One of." She handed him a glass. "There's a lot I haven't told you." "No kidding. I didn't lie," she added. "I just didn't say everything." Dylan walked to the edge of the room, looking out at the city. "So who are you, really?" Her voice was steady. "I run a tech company, Volt Edge. We do software development for infrastructure systems, AI logistics, a few other things." He turned around, eyes wide. "You're the Kara Fields. You're on the list of wealthiest CEOs under 40. She nodded once. "I didn't plan for you to find out this way. But you deserve more than half-truths." He studied her, his mind reeling. "Why hide it?" "Because I liked how you saw me. Because for once, someone wasn't trying to impress me or pitch me or use me. You just talked to me, and I didn't want to lose that." Dylan looked down at the wine in his hand. "You brought a billionaire painting to a school auction." She smiled faintly. "It was for Oliver," he exhaled, setting the glass on the table. "I don't know what this is, Kara. I don't know how we fit in each other's worlds." "I don't care about worlds," she said, stepping closer. "I care about you and him, and the way you make me feel like I don't have to be anything more than myself." He met her eyes, searching them for some kind of anchor. "I've got nothing to offer you." "That's not true," she said quietly. "You gave me something I haven't had in years. Peace. Laughter. A reason to look forward to Saturday." Dylan pulled in a shaky breath. "I don't know if I can keep up with all this." "Then don't," she whispered. "Let me come to you." He didn't answer right away, but then he reached for her hand and didn't let go. Dylan adjusted the collar of his jacket, glancing at his reflection in the elevator's polished chrome panels. The keycard Kara had given him weeks ago now rested in his pocket, but he hadn't used it again. Not until tonight. He'd taken his time, asked questions. Watched her not in awe of the wealth, but in search of the woman beneath it. And in every quiet moment they'd found since that night in her penthouse, she'd let him see her more clearly. Not the CEO, not the press-savvy mogul, just Kara. The elevator doors opened onto a rooftop garden, strung with warm lights that swayed gently in the breeze. Long tables stood along the perimeter, covered in white linen, with plates of food and bottles of wine resting untouched. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music drifting into the twilight. Kara stood near the railing, her back to him, in a simple, deep blue dress that moved like water around her ankles as the wind curled through it. She turned when she heard him step onto the stone tiles. "You came," she said, her voice calm but unsure. He walked toward her slowly. "Oliver's spending the night with Rachel. He made me promise to tell you not to forget his birthday next week." "I wouldn't miss it for anything," she said, her mouth curving with something close to relief. "He already told me exactly what kind of cake he wants. I figured he would." They stood in silence for a beat, the city glittering below them, wind lifting Kara's hair from her shoulders. Then Dylan stepped close enough to touch her hand but didn't. "I need to know something," he said. She nodded but didn't speak. "When you built all this, your company, your homes, your life, did you ever think about what it would feel like to share it?" Her eyes searched his. "I thought I'd find someone who wanted the same things: success, power, a legacy. But all I found were people who saw me as a stepping stone. And now," he asked, "now I just want something real, something that doesn't come with headlines or shareholders or quarterly projections." She paused, her voice softening. I want you and Oliver. Even if that means muddy shoes in my hallways and mismatched mugs in my kitchen. Dylan closed the space between them, brushing a strand of hair away from her cheek. I don't have a lot to offer you. I'm not going to buy a yacht or throw galas, but I'll love you with everything I've got. And I'll raise Oliver to know what it looks like when a man treats a woman with respect. That's more than enough, she said. It always has been. Her hand found his, fingers lacing with his like they'd done it 100 times before. He leaned in, resting his forehead against hers. I thought you might be too much for me, he whispered. And I thought you might be too good to be true, she said. I guess we were both wrong. The doors behind them opened again. From the elevator, Oliver rushed out, arms flailing with excitement. You said I could come when the surprise was ready, Dylan turned, eyebrows raising. You planned this with him, Kara nodded, a little sheepishly. He helped pick the lights. And the cake, Oliver added, pointing toward a silver cart being wheeled out by a server. On it sat a small white cake topped with a single handcrafted sugar daisy. Why is there cake? Dylan asked, Kara's voice steadied. Because this isn't just a rooftop dinner, it's a celebration. For what? For the fact that I'm choosing you, publicly. Permanently? Dylan blinked as Kara reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He opened it slowly, revealing a deed. His name was typed across the top. You bought me a house, he asked, stunned. No, she said. You bought the house. I just used my connections to make sure the seller picked your offer. It's in your name. You're going to need a yard for all the muddy shoes and water fights. Oliver threw his arms around Dylan's waist. Can I paint my room with stars? Dylan looked down at him, then up at Kara. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, she said. Just meet me at the house tomorrow. We'll hang curtains and argue over paint samples. He laughed, still trying to catch up. Are you moving in? I already did, she replied. Somewhere between your son's science project and your dumb joke about asparagus. He reached for her hand again, this time holding it like he'd never let go. You're not afraid of all this, the mess we come with, she shook her head. I've had enough control to last a lifetime. I'm ready for a little chaos, your kind of chaos. The quartet began to play something slow, something classical but tender. Dylan pulled her close, one hand settling at her back. We're really doing this, Kara smiled, her face soft against his shoulder. We already are. Below them, the city buzzed with lights and motion, but up on that rooftop, time slowed. Kara had spent years building an empire. But in Dylan's arms, with Oliver dancing in circles around them and the stars blinking above, she finally felt like she'd found home. And for the first time in a long time, Dylan didn't feel like he was surviving. He felt like he was living, with her. Dylan stood in the middle of the living room, his hands on his hips, staring at the open boxes stacked along the wall. Kara walked in behind him barefoot, her sleeves rolled to her elbows and a pencil tucked behind her ear. Well, she said, surveying the chaos, this either looks like a crime scene or a very enthusiastic yard sale. He looked over his shoulder. You sure you want to keep this couch? It's seen better days. She walked over and sat on the armrest. It's the first thing I ever bought that wasn't for optics. I was 22, broke, and trying to make my apartment feel like a home. I napped on this thing more than I slept in my bed. He ran a hand over the faded fabric. Then we're keeping it. They had spent the last 3 weekends blending pieces of 2 lives into one. Kara had insisted on selling her penthouse, claiming she never really liked the view anyway. The house Dylan bought small by her standards, with creaky floors and a yard full of dandelions, had become their new center of gravity. Oliver had claimed the back bedroom and was currently outside with a paint-splattered brush, trying to turn his ceiling into a galaxy. Dylan's sister, Rachel, had offered to help, but he'd politely declined. They were figuring this out as a family. Kara pulled a photo frame from one of the boxes. She turned it over and smiled. I forgot I had this. She passed it to him. It was a picture of her, years younger, standing in front of her first office building. Her hair was shorter, her suit too big, and her grin unapologetically wide. You look like someone who thought she had it all figured out, Dylan said. I did. And then I realized that having it all doesn't mean much if it's only yours. He set the photo down. So what does it mean now? She leaned into him. It means building something that belongs to all of us, together. They unpacked until the sun dipped low, turning the windows amber. At some point, Dylan disappeared into the kitchen, and Kara followed the sound of clinking glasses. He was pouring lemonade into mismatched tumblers. She leaned against the doorway. "You trying to impress me with your bartending skills? Just trying to keep up with someone who once negotiated a merger while walking through a thunderstorm." She blinked. "You read that article?" He handed her a glass. "I read everything after that night on the rooftop. I wanted to know what the world saw when they looked at you." And he looked at her for a long moment. "They saw a powerhouse. I saw the woman who taught my son the phases of the moon using cookie dough and a flashlight." Kara's throat tightened. She took a sip, needing the coolness to ground her. Outside, Oliver shouted something about nebulae and Dylan chuckled. "He's going to be insufferable when he finds out you bought him a telescope." "He already knows," she said. "I walked into his room this morning, and he was reading the manual out loud to his stuffed animals." Of course he was. Later that night, Kara stood at the foot of the backyard, barefoot in the grass, watching Dylan's string lights between two trees. They were soft and golden, casting a glow over the small wooden pergola he'd built by hand. She approached, her voice quiet. "You did all this today?" He looked down from the ladder. "You said the backyard felt incomplete. I figured you meant it needed character." "I meant it needed chairs." "Well, now it has both." When he climbed down, she reached for his hand. "You keep doing that." "Doing what?" "Making me fall harder." He pulled her closer. "I'm just trying to keep up with you." They danced under the lights later, music spilling softly from the open kitchen window. No choreography, no audience. Just the two of them swaying in the grass while Oliver lay on a blanket nearby, pointing up at constellations they couldn't see through the suburban haze. The next morning, they hosted a small brunch. Rachel brought muffins. Kara's assistant, Nadia, arrived with a bottle of champagne and a look of mild panic when she saw Dylan flipping pancakes in a t-shirt that read "World's Okayest Dad." Kara whispered to her, "He made that himself." Nadia blinked. "I can't tell if that's horrifying or charming. It's both." By midday, Oliver was showing off his telescope to a group of neighbors, and Kara was sitting on the porch steps, watching Dylan carry a tray of lemonade past the swing he'd installed 2 days earlier. She caught his hand as he passed. "You know what I realized?" He stopped. "What?" "I've spent years building things that made me look powerful, but none of them made me feel whole." He studied her expression. "And now," she stood, pressing her forehead lightly to his. "Now I feel like I'm finally living in the life I used to dream about. The one with messy breakfasts, bad jokes, and someone who sees every side of me and stays anyway." Dylan kissed her then, slow and steady, right there on the porch with neighbors 20 feet away and Oliver yelling about Jupiter in the background. Because when something is right, it doesn't need perfect timing or a spotlight. It just needs to be real. And this was real. 3 months later, they held a small ceremony under the backyard pergola, surrounded by the people who mattered most. No photographers, no press. Just white flowers, laughter, and vows whispered like promises long overdue. Oliver walked Kara down the aisle, grinning as he handed her off to Dylan with a dramatic, "You better not mess this up." Dylan bent slightly, whispering back, "Not a chance." They didn't need a castle or a private jet or a ballroom, they had each other, and that was everything.